The Zorvani armada floated above the shattered world of Kepler 62f, its hulls glinting with the light of a dying sun. Beneath their hovering fleet, cities smoldered, oceans boiled, and the last resistance signal had long gone silent. One more colony crushed, one more example to the stars. Grand Marshal Atrak Vahinar stood at the observation core of his flagship Vengeance of Kal Tor, his mandibles twitching in satisfaction. "So ends Earth's reach," he hissed to his war council, his multi-jointed fingers tapping against a holomap littered with red Terran outposts, all marked neutralized. By this cycle's end, his second-in-command Drevelos rumbled, "The Sol system will learn obedience." But that wasn't the mistake. The mistake was thinking Earth was done. The mistake was thinking they had seen the full reach of humanity. The alarms came not from the outer ring, nor from the early warning scouts. Those had already been reduced to husks of metal and bone. It came from silence, a signal gap, a total sensor blackout, then a ping. A single object breached the Zorvani interdiction net without triggering an alarm, stealthed but not by absence. It was hidden in plain sight by design. It rode the very folds of quantum interference. The ancients of old had written about death coming on black wings. The Zorvani would later say it came on a ripple in the void. And then the name appeared on their long-range scanner logs, etched in crude human English. HMS Consequences. It didn't look like much at first. No ornate fins like the Threxian dreadnoughts, no shimmering armor like the Varnic cruisers. Just a long, dark spear of alloy and mathematics, wrapped in armor that bent light wrong. Until it turned. The HMS Consequences rotated just slightly, and the entire Zorvani fleet's targeting arrays scrambled, scattering across impossible vectors. Reality flickered. Artificial gravity warped. Its engines weren't plasma, they were intent. Its hull wasn't metal, it was the memory of pressure forged into mass. Then it opened fire. There was no light show, no volley of fireworks, just deletion. The first Zorvani destroyer, Kal Nazrek, ceased to exist before the crew even realized they were under attack. No explosion, no debris, just space where mass used to be. The second, Barghun Tal, attempted to shield itself. Its kinetic dome shattered like glass, then inverted, folding the ship inward on its own gravity well. One of the older admirals, trembling, whispered, "This is not weaponry, this is vengeance programmed." The HMS Consequences moved with a grace that mocked its bulk. It drifted, rotated, struck, and paused like a predator bored with the hunt. No communication, no surrender demands, just war with surgical precision. Inside the command center, Captain Adrian Sloan stood like a statue carved from steel and regret. Her hands rested calmly on the rail. Her eyes, blue, cold and full of storms, never blinked. "Target next cluster," she said quietly. "Cluster of 12 enemy ships, range 1.6 light minutes," replied tactical AI Meridian. "Correction," Sloan murmured almost regretfully. "Enemy witnesses." Meridian paused, then reclassified the targets not as combatants but as liabilities. With a thought, Sloan authorized subroutine 47G. The ship's spine vibrated with a subharmonic pulse, and the laws of cause and effect bent. In a hidden corner of the system, aboard a neutral observation vessel, the Drenvari historians recorded in silence. "Did you get that?" whispered Archivist Talion. "No weapon signatures, no detectable radiation spike, no time between activation and result. It's as if they never existed," his assistant replied, voice shaken. But how? Talion didn't answer immediately. His species lived for understanding, but here understanding failed. Then slowly he spoke. Humans once called their gods by names like justice, memory, and retribution. This ship is not a weapon. He turned toward the flickering silhouette of the consequences, and his words were whispered into eternity. It is a sermon. Panic was not a thing the Zorvani knew until now. Grand Marshal Atrak Vuhnar screamed orders that bounced back unanswered. Their targeting couldn't lock. Their drives overheated even at idle. Their shields, they might as well be paper. They tried to run, they tried to hide, they even tried to surrender. No reply came. Then the vengeance of Kaltor's main screen displayed one word, no voice, no face, just black text on white, flickering in Terran standard font. Consequences, and below it, you ordered this. We deliver. Then silence, followed by unmaking. When the battle ended, no human boots ever touched the surface of Kepler 62F. There was no parade, no anthem, only wreckage. The HMS Consequences remained in orbit exactly 17 minutes after the last hostile vanished. It then vanished into the same ripple it arrived from, no flash, no trace. But what lingered wasn't fear, it was memory. Every race that watched that day, from the arrogant Zorvani to the silent Drenvari, came to one shared conclusion. Humanity didn't need to be loud. Their warships spoke for them, and when the galaxy heard the consequences, they listened. And in the shadow of this devastating appearance, political factions scramble, alliances tremble, and the question now echoes across the stars. If that was just one ship, how many more are watching in silence? The silence after the consequences left wasn't peaceful, it was haunting. In the weeks that followed, the shattered remains of the Zorvani fleet drifted like unburied ghosts above Kepler 62F. Charred hulls floated without gravity, flickering with dying lights, twisted into angles that defied physics and understanding. No one dared salvage them. No one dared approach the wreckage, because that would mean accepting that it happened. Across the galaxy, words failed. So instead, the stars whispered, and from those whispers came fear, then questions, then choices. High above the Sarathian arcology, the oldest legal hub in the known galaxy, 12 delegates gathered beneath the dome of Accord. For 200 years they had believed the humans were simply contained, limited, bound by treaties and diplomacy. Earth was considered passionate but reasonable, fierce but breakable. Now those assumptions lay shattered like the Zorvani flagships. Ambassador Korathel, representing the Brenthari Union, broke the silence first. Is this how the humans intend to enforce peace, with silence followed by extinction? No, said Envoy Malric of the Drenvari quietly. This was not about war, it was about reminder. Reminder of what? Cora spat. That they can wipe us out at will. Malric folded his hands, eyes heavy with thought. No, that they chose not to. Humanity had not always been feared. 300 years ago, they entered the galactic stage desperate, wide-eyed, and curious. They shared knowledge freely. They signed treaties. They sent teachers, scientists, and poets before they ever sent soldiers. They believed in mutual growth, but they were mocked, lied to, manipulated in economic deals. Colonies lost to slow blockades. Civilian ships caught in accidental military exercises. They had begged the Accord to act when Zorvani ships took children from Terran colonies for scientific study. The Accord had reviewed the matter for 84 years. During that time, humanity waited and built, and buried its pain in silence. They became polite, they became patient, but deep inside they began to forge doctrine, not for conquest, not even for war, but for memory. In the University of Luna Prime, Professor Yale Monroe stood before her students, many of them non-human, projecting the battle footage from Kepler 62F in slow motion. She didn't play the explosions. Instead, she froze the frame where the consequences hovered between two enemy dreadnoughts, still calm, unmoving. "Observe this moment," she said. A young Velari student raised a tendril. "Why didn't your ship finish them instantly? There was a gap." "Because our doctrines teach that power without pause is cruelty," she replied. Humanity learned, after 2 world wars and the age of firestorms, that destruction must always come with deliberation. Your warship destroyed dozens of ships. Where is the mercy? Yale tapped her console, displaying the Zorvani command logs recovered afterward. Messages had been sent, coded warnings in 27 languages. The consequences had offered one final demand: withdraw or witness what you chose. They were not given silence, they were given choice, and choice is the highest ethic we hold. The galaxy split not along borders but philosophies. Some called for an arms race. If the humans have ships like that, we must build stronger fleets. Others wanted alliance. Let us learn how they built it, perhaps they will teach us. A few called them monsters. Weapons like that have no soul, no restraint. But a few species, those who still remembered Earth's old kindness, asked the question that mattered most. Why did they wait this long to act? And those who knew whispered the truth, because humans are not cruel, but they never forget. Captain Adrian Sloane stood at the observation deck, now quiet. Kepler 62F was behind them. Ahead, a nebula bloomed like a wound in the stars. She was alone, not because she dismissed her crew, but because in this hour the burden of power weighed heaviest on her shoulders. The AI Meridian spoke gently. "Captain, inquiries from the Accord are flooding our comms. Most ask one thing: will we do it again?" Sloane didn't answer immediately. She looked at the stars, those ancient fires burning long before humanity had spoken its first word. Finally she said, "Tell them this: we do not seek war. But if war seeks us, let them remember we named this ship not for pride, but as a promise." In hidden temples, some began worshipping the ship as divine judgment. In military academies, its battle was studied in every known language. In children's books across human colonies, a new phrase appeared: be kind, be patient, but never forget the consequences. Because in the end, the ship wasn't just steel and weaponry. It was the accumulated grief of a species who had been burned, betrayed, underestimated, and who had learned to carry pain without hatred. And when they finally stood, they didn't roar. They whispered, and the galaxy trembled. It should have been easy to find out where the HMS consequences came from. A warship that powerful, surely it bore the flag of Earth, or the seal of the Terran Defense Network, or the crest of one of the old Martian city-states. Maybe even a rogue Black Ops unit, some whispered Section 7, or the long-denied Ghost Division. But when the galaxy demanded answers, Earth gave none. When the Accord sent official requests for records, Earth responded with polite confusion. No registry, no official record, no confirmation it was even real. Only one reply came back from Earth's diplomatic council, short and precise: "We acknowledge the gravity of the event. The vessel in question does not operate under any current human government." And just like that, the most powerful ship in known space was without a nation. Across 12 star systems, the race began, not for revenge but for understanding. If the HMS consequences didn't belong to Earth, then who built it? Who funded it? Who commanded it? Among the first to investigate was the Kalari Collective, masters of information brokerage. They tore through communications from Earth's moon bases, listening to encrypted whispers. They found nothing. Then came the Zethari mind chain. They sent psychic probes into human dreams across colonies. The dreams they uncovered weren't of weapons, but of loss, of burned cities, broken treaties, and silent resolve. The Varkon Syndicate tried bribery. The Drenvari tried reason. The Threxians tried prophecy. None succeeded, because this warship wasn't built in the open. It was built in mourning, and mourning doesn't keep paper trails. In a forgotten databank beneath the old human colony of Haven's Reach, an archivist named Lyra Mole, half cybernetic, half grief, stumbled on an old project tag. Project 42 Omega Fire doesn't forget. No blueprints, no coordinates, just a list of names. They weren't engineers, they were survivors. Families from Terran colonies long destroyed by the Zorvani, the Velarn incursions, and even a few accidental strikes by Accord peacekeeping patrols. People whose children had vanished without trials, whose homes were never rebuilt, who received apologies but no justice. And below the list was a single line of Terran standard: when diplomacy ends, memory speaks. In the high peaks of New Himalaya, a monastery of Terran philosophers gathered in a circle of stillness. One of them, Sister Kalia, spoke softly to a delegation from the Accord. "Humans are builders," she said, gazing out at the stars. "But we also remember. We do not carry grudges the way your species imagine. We carry lessons. We don't hunger for vengeance. We hunger for meaning." "Then why build that thing?" asked the Velari diplomat, voice heavy. Kalia didn't answer right away. Then she lifted her hand and traced a word in the air with a glowing thread of light: consequences. "You must understand," she continued, "that ship is not meant to destroy. It is meant to prevent, because there are still those in this galaxy who only understand lessons written in fire." In secret, some species began to fear more than the ship. They feared the idea that humanity didn't even need a government to wield such power. A ship like that, built in silence, maintained in secrecy, piloted by one captain and no political oversight. To some, that was freedom. To others, it was terror. On the Accord Council floor, panic grew. "If there is no flag," cried one delegate, "there can be no treaty. If there is no chain of command," another yelled, "how do we stop it?" Malric of the Drenvari stood calmly and spoke over the noise. "Perhaps you should have asked that before you broke so many of Earth's promises." Captain Adrian Sloane sat in her private quarters, the hum of the ship gentle around her. She was reading not orders but letters. Dozens of them, each one from a person whose family had been lost during the years the galaxy turned away from Terran pleas. Letters from survivors, from orphans, from those forgotten by diplomacy. They weren't calls for revenge, they were calls for memory. A soft tone sounded behind her. "Captain," said Meridian, "you have received a private hail from a source tagged Earth Underground Archive. Put it through." A face appeared, old, tired, familiar. "Hello, Adrian," the man said. "It's been a long time." She nodded. "I knew you'd call. Do they know yet?" "No," she said, her voice hardening, "but they are beginning to understand." He sighed. "And what will you do next?" Adrian stood and faced the screen fully. "I'll remind them that the consequences never belong to Earth." She paused, eyes narrowed. It belongs to every voice that was ignored. The galaxy had seen weapons before, it had seen terror, but never had it seen a warship that operated not out of conquest or state policy, but grief turned to justice. And now that ship had no borders, no leash, only purpose. The HMS Consequences had been built not to conquer stars, but to make sure no one else ever tried. And as more fragments of its origin surfaced, one truth echoed louder. It wasn't built for war. It was built because war was allowed to happen. The gathering at Celesthal, the Accord summoned every sovereign species to the luminous world of Celesthal, a planet wrapped in diamond atmosphere and glowing with the light of 6 suns. A world chosen for its symbolism, peace, diplomacy, and memory. It had never known war. And yet on this day, war hovered in every corner of the hall, not in cannons or weapons, but in the absence of the HMS Consequences. The seat reserved for Earth remained empty, despite a dozen invitations, despite offers of full dominion over the Accord's military structure, despite the desperate promises of reparation. Earth hadn't responded, not officially, not diplomatically. The silence was louder than threat. Delegate Vrenkar of the Zelari leaned forward, eyes shimmering with panic. We offer Earth the power it has always deserved. They held peace for a century while others exploited their patience. If they accept this treaty, we give them leadership of the Accord. Others nodded. The Alvari, once distant, agreed. Even the Threxians, known for their cold disdain, voted in favor. And why not? If the Consequences could level fleets in minutes, it was better to include humanity than live in fear of their silence. But Ambassador Malric, now Earth's closest unofficial voice, stood and spoke what no one wanted to hear. They will not come. In the outer rim, on a listening post orbiting the burned ruins of Kepler 62F, a historian named Juno Reyes recorded the moment. She wasn't a soldier, not a leader, just a keeper of memory. As she watched the Accord's vote unfold in silence across the starfeeds, she whispered to her assistant, "This is what the galaxy gets wrong." "What do you mean?" the assistant asked. "They think we built the Consequences to take power, to sit on thrones, but we never built it to rule." "Then why?" Juno turned from the screen, eyes sad. "Because no one listened when we whispered." 3 days later, a single signal was received, not from Earth, but from an encrypted relay long thought defunct. It played only once and then deleted itself. The image, Captain Adrian Sloane, her face was calm. Her uniform bore no flag, no insignia, only a single word on her collar. Remember, she spoke slowly, clearly, so every species would understand. "We appreciate your offer, but leadership granted in fear is not peace. It is surrender disguised as diplomacy." She paused. For centuries, Earth asked to be heard, not obeyed, not worshipped, just heard. "You taught us that silence means weakness, that patience is vulnerability." Her eyes sharpened. "You were wrong." On Sarath Prime, philosophers debated the message for days. "Why refuse control?" asked one thinker. "If they led, they could prevent future wars." "Because leadership without trust is occupation," replied another. "They don't want to conquer. They want accountability. They want the galaxy to grow its own conscience." "But how can we trust them now?" Silence followed. Then slowly someone said what all were beginning to realize. "They didn't show us what they could do, they showed us what they chose not to do." The ship drifted beyond the edge of mapped space near the Event Horizon Nebula, a place of silence and light. Captain Sloane sat in meditation, her hands folded, her breath steady. "Status of the Accord?" she asked. Meridian replied softly in chaos. They fear the silence more than any fleet. Good, she whispered. Are we ready to return? No, why not? She opened her eyes, quiet and calm, because they are not afraid enough to change. Across the galaxy, power was being reshuffled. The Zorvani, now leaderless, descended into civil war. The Threxians tried forming alliances with former enemies. The Alvari began drafting their own defensive ships, trying to mimic the consequences. But all of them missed the point. The ship was not powerful because of its weapons. It was powerful because it was unclaimed. Because it was born from silence, not orders. From loss, not politics. From memory, not ambition. And because of that, no one could ever build another like it. Because no one else had endured what humanity had and still chosen restraint. This was not a war of ships anymore. It was a war of ideas. Should power serve politics, or should power stand apart as a warning? Should justice be handed down by governments, or should it rise from people who remember what was lost? Humanity refused the throne, and in doing so they became more powerful than ever. Not rulers, not tyrants, but the galaxy's mirror, a mirror that didn't shout, it simply asked, "Do you like what you see?" For months there had been no sign of the HMS consequences. No comms, no sensor trail, no threat. But it was not peace that followed, it was paralysis. Across the galactic core, empires that once roared now whispered. Fleets that once patrolled now hesitated. Every time a destroyer was launched, every time a mining outpost was expanded into contested space, eyes turned skyward in dread. Would it come? No official warning would ever precede it, because when the consequences arrived, it was already too late. The Velcor Dominion had survived 4 galactic collapses. Ruthless, efficient, proud, they never apologized. They conquered, occupied, and rewrote history with the tip of a plasma lance. But when they reached the disputed moons of Rithel Prime, moons under Terran protection by treaty, they paused, not from mercy, not from diplomacy, but because of what wasn't said. Their fleet admiral, Narak Dor, had studied every detail of Kepler 62F's aftermath. He had seen how the Zorvani flagship disappeared, not exploded, not crippled, not surrendered, just erased. And when asked if they should proceed with the invasion, Narak's answer was simple. No, not unless you want to meet the thing that Earth doesn't even claim. In the growing regions between Terran influence and galactic expansion, a strange new status began to emerge. Silent space, zones where no military dared operate, no corporation mined, no diplomat provoked, not because they were marked on maps, but because no one wanted to be remembered by the consequences. Independent colonies began marking their stations with a single human symbol, 2 lines crossing in an X, painted in white on black steel. No flags, no names, just that. To some it meant we're protected. To others, we're not part of this war, but to all, whispered, we know silence. Please pass us by. The Accord had grown desperate. They tried everything. Proposals for joint military transparency. Offers to build a fleet with Earth. Treaties promising limitation of expansion into Terran-affiliated zones. But Earth replied with the same calm message each time. We do not seek to lead, we only remember. And then one day a new signal was intercepted, origin unknown. It wasn't encrypted. It wasn't even hidden. It simply played on an open channel in every major system. We are not watching you. We are listening to your decisions. Do what you will, but know this. Our silence is not your permission. Military academies from the Ekran Republic to the Brenthari Compact, began teaching a new strategic model, Doctrine Zero, built entirely around the avoidance of consequences. It wasn't about winning battles. It was about not being noticed. Protocols included reduced aggression in disputed zones, reevaluation of historical reparations, mandatory empathy training for commanding officers, human culture literacy. For first contact crews, one Brenthari admiral, grizzled from 100 campaigns, looked over the doctrine and said, "So, the new law of the galaxy is, don't be an asshole in front of the quiet ones." Everyone laughed, but no one laughed long. Not all took the lesson wisely. Some believed the HMS Consequences was a bluff, a relic, a trick. And so in the dark edges of known space, the Morakan Syndicate decided to test it. They struck a civilian Terran relay station near the fringe of the Sirius cluster. Small, unarmed, filled with researchers and archivists. Within 18 hours, their fleet vanished. No explosion, no record, no debris. Only a final message was left behind on a black beacon drifting alone. The past has eyes. Back on the Consequences, Adrian Sloane stood before a wall of names etched into titanium. No weapons, no strategy, just names, not of enemies, but of people forgotten, colonists lost, diplomats silenced, or children killed in diplomatic incidents the Accord never addressed. She didn't hate the galaxy, she didn't want control, but she had purpose. "Status report," she said. Meridian replied, "System scan complete, no violations." And the Accord, still pretending peace is their design. Sloane nodded slowly. "Then we wait, we listen. And if they forget again," she touched the wall of names, "we remind them." The war had already happened, not a war of ships, but a war of values. And humanity had won it not through force, but through the choice not to use it until the line was crossed. The galaxy would never be the same, because now every diplomat wrote with caution, every admiral thought twice. Every empire asked the question no one dared before, what if they are listening? And in that fear, a fragile new peace formed, not out of trust, but out of respect for the silence. It came from a dead world. Zarya 4, once a thriving Terran research colony, had been scorched 20 years ago in what the Accord called a tragic diplomatic oversight. Accidentally caught between a border dispute, no one claimed responsibility. No reparations ever came. Official reports said there were no survivors. But now a signal was broadcasting from Zarya 4. It wasn't a distress call. It wasn't encoded. It was a story. The figure on the screen was human, male, mid-40s, skin sun-weathered, beard rough, but eyes sharp and unflinching. He didn't shout, he didn't beg, he simply began, "My name is Tomas Ravel. I was 11 when Zarya 4 burned. I survived in a collapsed substation while my parents screamed through the static. I remember every second, every voice that faded before the flames. I've lived 2 decades among ruins." He paused, letting silence settle like ash. "And now, I speak for the ones who don't." The message spread like a virus, first through human colonies, then Drenvari listening posts, then across the entire Accord. In a day, Tomas became a symbol not of revenge but of reminder. He wasn't threatening, he wasn't angry, he was clear. "You call the Consequences a monster, but I ask you, what built it? What silence? What apology that never came? You think this is about fear, but it's not." He stared straight into the feed, eyes steady. "It's about finally hearing what you ignored." The Accord panicked. "He's dangerous," some said. "He'll radicalize the colonies," others warned. They offered him a platform, a chair on the new Galactic Ethics Committee. He refused. "I don't need your committee," he replied. I don't want a seat at your table. I want you to look at the table and ask what blood built it. Some accused him of being backed by Earth's military. Others said he was a plant by the HMS Consequences crew. But those who listened closely knew this man wasn't a puppet. He was the result. Reporters, scholars, diplomats, and pilgrims began landing on Zarya 4, not to reclaim it, to see, to walk the husks of research domes still melted into the rock, to touch walls that still held handprints of those trying to escape, to stand in the shadow of the ruins and realize this is what the galaxy once called acceptable losses. Tomas guided them not as a tour guide, but as a witness, and every time he ended with the same words, "If you had listened then, there would have been no consequences." One dusk, as acid winds danced across the crater fields, a sleek shadow fell over the plains. The HMS Consequences had returned. It didn't land, it simply hovered in silence above the ruins. Then from its ramp one figure descended, Captain Adrian Sloane. She didn't speak for the ship, she didn't wear medals, she walked like a pilgrim. And when she met Tomas by the broken spire of the Central Research Dome, they said nothing at first. Then Tomas spoke. "Why now?" Sloane looked up at the ship. Her voice was quiet, "Because you reminded them what the silence means." Later that night by the memorial stones, Tomas and Sloane recorded one final message. Not for governments, not for soldiers, for people. "You don't need a warship to be heard," Tomas said. "You just need to keep remembering even when it hurts," Sloane added. And together they spoke a truth the galaxy had never dared to voice. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it walks. Sometimes it bleeds, but it always returns. From that moment, the Consequences was no longer just a warship. It became a movement, a doctrine of memory, an understanding that silence is not peace, and justice without accountability is just delay. Other ships emerged, not with weapons like the Consequences, but with stories, with archives, with survivors. Humanity had started something the galaxy couldn't undo, and the only question left was who would listen before the next silence came. They didn't call it a peace accord. They didn't dare call it a pact. Too many treaties had come before, signed in gold, sealed in silence, and forgotten with blood. This one had no gold. It had names, over 4. 2 million names of civilians lost in incidents, of researchers buried under rubble, of ambassadors gunned down after ignored pleas, of children who vanished under the veil of imperial neglect. It was called the Memoriam Concord, and for the first time in galactic history, a treaty wasn't written by victors. It was written by survivors. Tomas Ravel stood at the podium, not on a raised platform, but among a half-circle of chairs. No stage, no spotlight. He sat eye level with diplomats, military leaders, and alien historians. Beside him sat children born in exile, mothers who lost entire families, Drenvari monks who'd archived the screams the Accord never listened to. Each of them was allowed to speak. Each of them was heard. And with every testimony, the Accord finally began to understand this wasn't about reparations. It was about recognition. Captain Adrian Sloane was offered command over an expanded humanitarian fleet, her choice of ships, budget, and authority. She refused. Instead, she handed the assembled leaders a single datapad. It held a phrase, etched not in technical specifications but in human ethics. Never again will memory be denied the gravity of action. She left without ceremony, because this treaty wasn't hers to lead. It was the galaxy's to live with. The Memoriam Concord included a living record publicly accessible across all species that preserved all names of the lost with context, apology, and accountability. A silence clause requiring all major powers to respond within 30 days to any verified survivor claim under threat of automatic tribunal inquiry. The creation of listening ships, non-armed vessels sent to crisis zones to record stories, not just statistics. Staffed by survivors, not bureaucrats. The recognition of the consequences doctrine as a galactic standard of ethical military restraint. It was not perfect, but it was real. It passed by majority, though not unanimous. The Zorvani remnants abstained. The Threxian hardliners protested, but they did not stop it, because now every refusal risked being named by the very thing they feared most, the consequences of silence. In mining outposts on the edge of human space, people wept, not out of victory, but because their parents were finally named. In alien academies, students read human philosophy not as curiosity, but as requirement. On battlecruisers once poised to strike Earth, war banners were lowered, not because they lost, but because they understood what was at stake now. And on Zarya 4, Tomas Ravel stood beneath the rising sun, planting a tree beside the memorial stones. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Because for the first time in his life, the galaxy had spoken back. The HMS consequences still existed, still drifted beyond the edges of known space. But now it wasn't feared, it was respected, not because of what it destroyed, but because of what it refused to destroy until it had no other option. It had never fired for revenge, only to make the galaxy pause, to listen. And now the stars had finally whispered back, "We heard you." The galaxy had changed, not from conquest, not from invasion, but from a ship that said nothing and let everyone feel what they'd tried so long to ignore. The Memoriam Concord held. No great empires fell. No fleets clashed. And yet, thousands of old war doctrines were torn apart in silence. Hundreds of colonial protocols were rewritten. And most importantly, millions of names once forgotten were now spoken aloud in classrooms, in memorial halls, in the songs of new worlds. Then one day the HMS consequences vanished. No explosion, no farewell message. One moment it was seen passing near the edge of the Veil Nebula. The next it was gone, no trace, no signal, no crew response. Many believed it was intentional, because the ship had never been meant to stay. It had done what it was built for. It made the galaxy look inward. And now it had left behind only memory. Weeks after the disappearance, one encrypted transmission reached Tomas Ravel. It was from Adrian Sloan, not a command message, just a recording, her voice tired, steady, human. "Tomas, if you're hearing this, then we've gone dark by choice. I've spent years aboard this ship, watching, listening, waiting. And I believe this galaxy doesn't need our presence anymore. It needs our absence, not because they've changed completely, but because they've begun to listen without being warned. We are not gods. We are not judges. We are just a consequence of silence, of failure, of forgetting what people deserve, dignity before diplomacy. Let them build their peace now, and let that peace come not from fear of us, but from remembering what we made them face in the mirror." In the years that followed, the galaxy did not become perfect, but it became more honest. The Velcor began opening archives. The Zorvani survivors lit ceremonial fires in honor of Terran civilians lost. The Accord created the Office of Collective Memory, headed not by politicians but survivors and scholars. Every 5 years a new list was read aloud, not of deaths, but of redemptions, moments when ships stood down, when captains refused unlawful orders, when colonies reached across borders not with guns, but with grief and grace. They called these events echoes of the consequences. In the great plains of New Terra. There now stands no statue of Captain Sloane, no towering monument of the consequences, just a garden, filled with the names of the forgotten, with trees planted for each world remembered, and a single plaque carved in quiet steel. We did not come to conquer, we came to remind you what you already knew, that peace begins where silence ends. Children across the galaxy now grow up reading not about wars, but about choices, about the ship that never declared war, about the captain who never gave speeches, about the man who lived in ruins and taught the stars to feel again, about how sometimes the most powerful voice is the one that says nothing until the moment when it's finally heard. No one knows if the HMS Consequences will ever return. Maybe it still waits beyond the rim, maybe it listens, maybe it sleeps, but its silence is no longer fear, it is hope. Because now the galaxy understands the absence of war isn't peace, but the presence of memory can become one.